I love it. The best production team in the whole of broadcasting. It's Andrew Eborn here. Welcome along to a fascinating Thursday. And this is the Muckrakers, the show where we strip the day's big talking points down to their bare bones and devour the red meat of pure debate as we focus on the stories that matter to you, wherever you're listening or watching from around the world. Well, today, surprise, surprise, the British Prime Minister announces a general election for July the 4th. Will there be fireworks? China is accused of supplying lethal aid to Russia, and a new report that finds more than half the world does not have free speech. And this is how you can get in touch. Here are the numbers.
This is the way we're going to be heard.
From the U.S. and Canada, call 1-888-201-6425. From the U.K., call 033-0024-1026. And from Australia and New Zealand, call 1-800-670-310. Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Free speech is indeed alive and well. And I tell you what, everybody grizzles that there's no platform to talk, air their views. Well, this is the platform. Do get in touch. I know you people chattering away in the chat, but actually have the courage to phone in because we'd love to hear from you. And then you can make sure your views or your questions are put to the people. Any thoughts on today's topic, even if you just want to raise something completely different, do get in touch. Well, today I'm delighted to say that TNT heavyweights and legends of broadcasting, Rick Munn and James Freeman, are back with me. How are you doing, boys?
Fantastic. I'm not sure I feel about being called a heavyweight. Maybe a cruiserweight or a middleweight would be nice, because I'm just short, but I am a heavyweight. I'm not going to lie. So yeah, I'll take it. Andrew.
Okay, well, what I also love is that between us, I'm the sort of sandwich between your two glorious shows. Like somebody was saying it's a bologna sandwich. I love it. It's got to be good. But it's a real joy. Well, Rishi Sunak, I'll tell you what, who was surprised? I predicted this a little while ago, July the 4th. I said there was going to be fireworks. We predicted it right here. And it's interesting because he's called it for July the 4th, Thursday the 4th of July. And he made the announcement in a rain-soaked speech. It was extraordinary outside Number 10 as he bids to win a fifth term in office for the Conservatives. But after a premiership fraught with Tory scandal, is there any possibility Sunak can remain in power? What do you think, Rick? Can Sunak turn this around for the Tories?
I doubt it very much. And, we're talking about this announcement that was formally made yesterday, okay? And I was stunned at the delivery where we saw a little drowned and, wet through Rishi standing at the podium looking very sorry for himself. I think this was an attempt at either gaining sympathy or making himself look like a tough guy, but it failed miserably. I don't know about you guys. I'm not a big fan of eating lettuce, especially iceberg lettuce, but at least when you wash an iceberg lettuce, it retains some kind of rigidity. Green lettuce, when you wash it, it goes really limp in the bowl or in the colander. Well, Rishi reminded me of a little green lettuce leaf that I washed a little bit too much here. I think it backfired. And I saw a propaganda piece Putin did not so long ago where he was laying a wreath to remember Russian soldiers that were killed, and famously there was an aide standing beside him with an umbrella to stop him getting soaked, but he pushed that man to the side and he walked up in the pouring rain, laid a wreath and knelt down at the cenotaph. That was a massive PR win for Putin.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yesterday it unfortunately made Rishi look like a little lettuce leaf, so I think it backfired a little bit, guys.
It was extraordinary. I say, not only predicted that it was going to be on July the 4th, I also predicted the headlines today, although I think it's much better. Things can hardly get wetter rather than working on that sort of basis. What did you make of it all, James?
I think he's got a tough job, hasn't he? There's lots of reasons why. We've got 64 Tory MPs standing down at the election, so we're going to have fresh faces there. Will that change things and influence things? 18 of those 65 are prominent MPs, so a former PM, a couple of Secretary of States and some very, very senior MPs. That's going to have an effect. Then we've got the obviously the demise, which I must admit I've been applauding, of the SNP in Scotland. But the irony of that, of course, is that the party that will pick up a lot of those seats if the SNP collapse are Labour. So that's going to make it very, very tough for Sunak as well. And then we've got Reform squeezing. So I think the Tories are going to be squeezed. We've got 6 weeks of good weather, hopefully, coming up, which means lots of boats will be coming across. In fact, we just got the latest immigration figures today. And last year, I think it's nearly 700,000 people came and stayed in the UK. So there's lots of issues. And of course, Nigel Farage has announced this morning that he is not going to stand. I think that's a real mistake on Nigel's part. But when you add all these things up together, I think it's something big's going to have to happen that we are not aware of yet.
You make an interesting point. I know Nigel very well and shared many a studio with him on that sort of basis. But I think he's made it very clear he's going to focus his energies actually the other side of the world. He's going to be making sure that Donald Trump gets his time again in office. So I think Nigel knows what he's up to.
But the problem is, Nigel has led everybody along. For the last 6 weeks, he's been saying to his followers, should I, shouldn't I? You know, we need to take the Tories apart and all of that. You know, and of course, he didn't stand in the 2019 general election when he was leader of the party that I was in there, an MEP for, the Brexit party. He didn't stand even though he was leader. And then, of course, he stood down loads of candidates to give the win to Boris. He's lost an awful lot of credibility. Personally, I think this will be the icing on the cake. I think that Nigel now is a spent force in terms of the UK, in terms of his influence with a large proportion of the public. He will do well in the US because he's still got a lot of influence with the US public. But I think this is it in terms of Nigel Farage as a political influencer with the British public. And I think it's a shame.
I'm not so sure. I reckon Nigel's still got a lot of lead in his pencil, and I know he's got quite interesting ambitions as well. We've got callers. The hotlines are already melting. Let's go to line 27, and we've got Frank on the line. How are you, Frank?
Hello, Andrew. Fine very much. And yourself?
I'm wonderful. It's great to have you back on the show. Were you surprised by Rishi's declaration yesterday?
Yes, because I think he'd have done better to have waited, but let the latest good news actually sort of bed in a bit before calling it. But there you go. I think it's. I think he's got a sporting chance there because Harold Wilson said there was a week is a long time in politics, so 6 weeks or so will be who knows what might happen, especially as although the Labour are so well ahead in the polls, they have a huge hill to climb because of the buffer, if you like, of the Conservative seats, and also boundary changes and all sorts of different things. And they really would depend upon the collapse of the SNP in Scotland, which may happen. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you make an interesting point about the timing, Frank, because I think actually, if you were looking at it, and this is why I predicted July the 4th, and what he was trying to look for is a big advance in one of his 5 pledges, not least inflation, which was the easiest one of all, bring down inflation when it was over 11%. And he said he was going to halve it. Well, what was it, 2.3 or something? Yesterday, it was great news. Right. If he waited until the summer, you'll get more and more boats crossing. I can tell you, when the weather's good, that's what's going to happen. So I think the timing's interesting. What do you think on timing then, Rick? What do you think about the timing of it?
Well, again, a lot of people are scratching their heads thinking about what the pros and the cons of the timing are. And earlier on in Locked and Loaded, I was discussing this with Catherine McBride. She's a free market economist. You know, maybe he's banking on the fact that people are buying into what he's told about the lessening inflation. But the problem is a lot of people don't even understand what inflation actually is. And when they actually go to the supermarket and they start to buy their groceries, or they're renewing their car insurance, although it's not directly linked to inflation, they're seeing themselves being squeezed a lot. So maybe it wasn't the smartest move to go in on a pledge of halved inflation when people aren't seeing that translated into what's happening in their pockets.
And you're absolutely right. It's about communication, isn't it? I always say, get rid of the jargon. The more we can jargon bust. The reason Boris was so good beforehand with the 80-point majority, 80 seats he got, remember not that long ago, was because he was a great communicator. He was the Carlsberg of politicians. He could reach the parts of the electorate that others couldn't reach. He turned into this Marmite figure, but he could communicate. So for the benefit of those listening who don't know what inflation is, what is it, Rick?
Well, it's the cost of there's a virtual shopping basket, if you want to translate it into its simplest terms, that the government decides what goes into that shopping basket. And then they use that, what was it last year to buy these items versus what does it cost this year? I'm using it in very simplistic terms here. But if they want to skew it in their direction, for example, the cost of sugar and the cost of milk and bread's gone up over the last year, but the cost of something like razor blades might have stayed static. So it's a very easily manipulated figure. And of course, there's different levels of, there's headline rates of inflation, and there's inflation regarding the different sectors and zones. So it can be very confusing. Simplicity and clarity is needed when it comes to
you're absolutely right. It's very easily explained. Well done. Good about the razor blades. That's why you've got a bit of stubble. Is that right?
Yes, I can't afford razor blades. Unfortunately, I don't have a choice.
I understand. So timing. Talk to me then, James, about what do you think of the timing of the call for the election?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. I'll just mention inflation. I used to head business inflation at the ONS. I've also worked on the CPI and RPI. It's first of all, Rick, it's not the government that pick what goes into the basket. It's statisticians at the ONS, and they do it based upon retail weights. So basically, if they try and pick a representative basket of what people are actually buying. In terms of the timing, the other interesting thing about the timing is that the quarterfinals of I think it's the European Cup, not the World Cup. I should know that. I used to follow football a lot, but I don't really get the time these days. But anyway, it's the quarterfinals, I think, the eve before. Now, yes. I've read analysis that was part of the factor. Now, I don't know exactly why. Maybe he thinks maybe more Labour voters go to football matches and they'll all have a hangover and they won't turn up. But interestingly... I don't know. I'm just, thinking out loud. But Sir Keir Starmer has been holding a lot of his press conferences at football stadiums across the UK. What to make of that, I don't know. But apparently that is part of their thinking.
I know. I think you're absolutely right. It's the feel-good factor. And to me, it was really simple in terms of the divide. Rishi was sort of saying is, look, stick with me. We're on plan. We're making headway. And Labour basically are saying, we've got to change everything, which is interesting, isn't it? Rick.
Yeah, for sure. You're going to get an awful lot of flip-flopping, I think, Andrew, over the next 6 weeks. You're going to see a lot of changes in positions. Of course, the closer you get to election, the more rhetoric that will be coming out that will tickle the potential voters' ears. But the thing with what we're doing here, for example, is, a lot of this has been documented and time-stamped, and a lot of people are very savvy to what they have been told in the past, especially in the recent times. So it's going to be hard for him to maneuver in that 6-week window to do any major U-turns in policy, for example, whenever he's been very consistent on certain things over the last year and a bit that he's been unelected PM of Britain.
Yeah, it's interesting. So how do you see the general election going then, James?
Oh Christ. Look, I think if we don't see any big surprises, and we could do, I'm sure there's a few being hidden and kept back, especially for the campaign itself. But if we don't see any huge upsets, like a scandal about Sir Keir Starmer or the Labour Party, I think it's pretty clear that the Labour Party are going to be the next government. I think it's just the question is the size of the majority that they will get. I guess there is a possibility of a hung parliament. Personally, I don't think that will happen. I think with the SNP in Scotland collapsing, and Labour picking up most of those votes, I think that will swing it.
No, very, very interesting. Well, time is flying by today. I love the calls. Thank you very much to Frankie for calling in. Do call in. We'll tell you those numbers again in a bit. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching today's News Talk TNT. This is the Muckrakers. We'll be back after these messages.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk TNT.
I love it. Right, I tell you what, the box is getting us all joy. The joys of television, they sort of whisper in your ear. This is the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm joined brilliantly by the Rick Munn and James Freeman, and we're unpacking the world's biggest stories. Lovely to get your calls as well. Now, let me move on to another story here. Rishi Sunak said that he and Austria leader are deepening cooperation on illegal migration, as they agreed schemes like the Rwanda plan are needed to tackle the issue in Europe. The Prime Minister met Chancellor in Vienna on Tuesday, with the main aim of the trip being to promote the use of third country deportation schemes, such as the government's Rwanda plan. Oh, we love that word, don't we? What a joy. Well, will the Rwanda scheme ever take off? I'll be interested in your views. Start us off, Rick. What do you reckon?
No, because it's been talked about for years. It's a ludicrous proposition to let people come into the UK to begin with, or Ireland in this case, to have them deported back, because we talked a lot in the last few weeks about the people fleeing to Ireland to escape from the Rwanda deportations, and there was talk of them being sent back. No one has, of any significance, has been sent over there yet. Rwanda's bang on the equator. You have to cross Europe flying to get there. You have to go down into pretty much what's bordering on sub-Saharan Africa to get there. And then what are those people going to do when they get there? I've been talking about this particular topic for 2 full years now on TNT since it was first proposed, and it's still yet to get off the ground. That plane is yet to take off per se. Maybe I'll be surprised, but it just seems ludicrous. And I think you mentioned the other day, Andrew, in one of the pieces that you were doing, prevention is better than cure. Don't let the people in the first place illegally. Then you won't have to deport them to Rwanda or anywhere else for that matter.
You're absolutely right, Rick. I mean, I got a couple of points on that, and then I'll bring James in. And first of all, I think the timing is very, very interesting, because now what's going to happen? Now it's July the 4th. It's almost guaranteed there will be no planes taking off before then. But Rishi can play to the narrative. Look, stick with us. We're going to make sure that planes do take off. We've got some lined up. So when you vote us back into power, it's going to happen. But if you go with the others, they've made it clear they don't support the Rwanda scheme. So you're going to get no solutions. I think that's quite clever tactic. What do you reckon, James?
Yeah, I do see the political angle there, but like always, a lot of these the difference between the Tories and Labour is actually a load of rubbish. I remember the 2010, particularly that election, where essentially we were talking about a difference in budgets between, I think it was 6 billion different in budgeting between the Tories and Labour, which I've worked in the national accounts. It's not even a rounding error, 6 billion. So the whole election became focused on this 6 billion. It's a load of rubbish. So, yeah, I think that in terms of the actual policy itself, I agree with Rick and yourself. We need to stop them coming here in the first place. And that is a European policy that needs to be put in place. We need to stop them coming from Europe in the first place. It's ridiculous to let them in and then have a merry-go-round of then flying them to another country. In terms of the UK, though, if the EU won't play ball, I think the policy could work, but not the way the British government are deploying it. Because what they're doing at the moment is they're going after people that are already in the country. They told them they were going to come for them, by the way. So, they've all gone into hiding. They're hiding from the Home Office now, going into the black market and whatever. So that was fail number one. What they should have done was say, look, the people that are here, they're already here. Okay, so we're going to deal with them. But what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the camps in France. We're going to make sure that they know from next Monday, the next 10 boats or whatever, you're going to be picked up, you're going to be driven to a detention camp or whatever centre, and then you're going to be flown to Rwanda. If you said that, then they're going to think twice about paying €5,000 to get a boat to be met by the British police. And I think that's how you deploy it. The Tories aren't doing that, so I think it is going to fail.
I think there's a couple of points on this. First of all. Yeah, just firstly, though, I think.
Question.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Oh, okay.
No, I was going to ask you a question.
Go on, there's a delay. Go for it, Rick. You go, Rick.
Right. I was going to say, asking you a question. Do you not feel that this is a token gesture? This whole Rwanda thing is a token gesture, somewhere people's attention can be focused on, but nothing actually happens. Much like the Bibi Stockholm barge that was famously floated across, moored up, it could take up to 500 men or whatever it happened to be. Never really got off the ground, but it was certainly a focal point for something being done, but yet nothing was really done. That's the way I look at these schemes that are dreamed up. They look big and they're good talking bites, but they don't actually equate to anything.
Rick, it's the Uni Party.
A couple of points on that. Yeah,
it's the Uni Party.
It is. A couple of points. First of all, the whole thing about the safety of Rwanda. It was Abraham Lincoln who basically said, if you call the tail of a dog a leg, how many legs does a dog have? Well, the answer is still 4, because just calling it so doesn't make it one. And it's the same with Rwanda. The whole Rwanda Act was about declaring it to be a safe country. They need assurances on those sort of issues. But the focus is wrong. A couple of focuses wrong. First, it should be the people traffickers we should be doing, the horrendous trade and the criminal gangs. That's what we need to look at. But also, Rwanda doesn't have the capacity to deal with it. What did they start off? What was it, 200 or something crazy? That's all they can handle out of the zillions of people that are coming over. So I think from that point of view, they were trying to show that something could happen. The timing of it now means, and I predict not one flight will take off. And my good friend Piers Morgan will win his bet with Rishi Sunak. Basically, not a flight's going to take off, especially if the Tories don't get in. But I think he's turned it into this political hot potato. It's always been political hot potato, but basically to change the narrative, saying if you don't vote for us, then no flights are going to take off anyway. What do you reckon?
Yeah.
James.
I mean, look, this is the problem with our politics as well. It's all about, rather than promoting what you're going to do and the positivity about your policies, what you do is you say, if those lot get in, Tories kind of saying, if you let Labour in, they'll ruin the economy. Labour generally say traditionally that if you let the Tories in, they're going to sell off the NHS. And this is the problem we got with the politics. It's polarised, and both parties, instead of singing what they're going to do, they end up saying, well, if you let them in, it's going to be a disaster. You need to vote us in to stop them getting in. That is what is wrong with our politics today.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's the point I've made beforehand, is people are voting for a negative thing. What's happening is they're turning around and saying, look, we don't like them, and therefore we vote for the others, as opposed to a positive vote. And we saw in the recent local elections, actually the biggest winner of all was apathy. And you turn around, and what was it, 32% of the people came out in certain places, 22% in others. What we need to do is incentivize people. Let's get the people behind and basically get policies that they can believe in and vote on a positive point of view. Isn't that right, Rick?
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to add about the whole Rwanda refugee scheme, when we talk about the capacity, what capacity they have to take in people that are being sent from the UK, obviously that's limited by what the government are paying the Rwandese government to put them up in good accommodation and provide them with some form of benefits. In East Africa, I haven't spent quite a lot of time there. There's a lot of people flowing from one country into another. So there's a lot of people fleeing for persecution in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, hopping into Rwanda to simply preserve their lives. They're being absorbed within that system. Uganda is the biggest source of refugees in all of East Africa at the minute. Kenya takes them in. They're flowing down from the southern Sudan into Kenya, from Somalia into Kenya. So there's a huge amount of traffic going on at the minute in East Africa, in these countries with refugees. But the difference is that the governments of the other countries that they're coming from are not subsidizing Rwanda or Kenya or Uganda. They're just piling in, and they're eking out a living by whatever means necessary. We'll have to remember that this is no doubt Paul Kagali's hand is being greased by the UK government and the taxpayer. So therefore, that's limiting the amount of places that are being held open for these hard-pressed folk from the UK.
You're also, and also people have to remember it's part of a bigger picture. It's not just about the boats. We have a migration issue, and we have to turn out those who come over legally and work through that basis. Some of them are needed, quite a few are needed, to make sure that the whole mechanism, things like care homes and so on and so forth, do things. And what's happened, they've slashed the numbers by turning around and saying, well, you can't have your dependents coming along. And it'd be interesting to see what happens there. I mean, it's a debate that's going to rage and rage and rage, isn't it? But what do you think, then, is the best plan for controlling illegal migration in the UK, or illegal migration? Let's deal with that first. What do you reckon, James?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, really, we should be stopping the boats. I don't think there's any chance of the EU. They're controlled by global. I mean, they are a globalist organization themselves, the EU. So I don't think they're going to play ball. So, I think, and it's a difficult one because a lot of people like Reform UK are saying we just need to stop the boats and turn them round and take them back to France. I think maybe that would work. I think it's problematic in international law, but also the relations with France and the EU. It's a difficult one to say whether that would work or not. I don't know. But of course, that is essentially what you need to do, is you need to stop people coming here in the first place, because once they're here, it's very, very difficult to send them back. And of course, the problem with all of this, is when you look at legal migration. As I said, the numbers came out this morning, nearly 700,000 last year. We've seen the legal migration figures over the last couple of years are the biggest in British history in terms of the number of people that have been added to the country. But, the problem with illegals is that we don't know who they are. And it's a national security issue. Most of them are young men. They're not coming with their women and children, and we don't know who they are. And so that is the problem. But it is a difficult challenge to solve without us having the EU on board with us.
Well, we'll help solve it here at the Muckrakers. That's what we love to do. But moving on from Rwanda to Russia. And the British Secretary of State for Defence has accused Russia and China of collaborating on combat equipment for use in the 2-year-long war in Ukraine. Grant Shapps, remember him well, accused the nations of covering each other's back and also claimed that Britain has evidence that China is supplying Russia with lethal aid. Do you believe China is supplying aid to Russia, Rick?
Wouldn't be surprised at all. And if they are, so what? Surely, if the cap fits were it, we have been supplying lethal aid through Ukraine via NATO as well, as has America, as has most European countries, one way or the other. So this is a proxy war that's going on at the minute in Ukraine versus Russia. So of course, there's going to be outside influence on the side of Russia from other people. To which extent, I have no idea. I don't know the exact facts and figures, but what I do know is that how supportive have Britain been to the war effort for the Ukrainians fighting against Putin? How many billions have been sank into that black financial abyss over the last few years, and have been pledged more to be sent there over the next few years as well. And in return for what? Where's the accounting? Where's the transparency? How do we know where that money's gone in the first place? So whilst, yes, maybe China have been supporting Russia in this war, but then again, how can we complain about that when we've been doing the same thing under the auspices that if we don't do that, that we're next, Putin's going to roll over Poland, he's going to roll over France, and then he's going to storm the beaches at Dover. Well, he's going to have to get in line because there's already dinghy loads of men coming from France doing that at the minute. So I think it's Rich of Shapps, of all people. That's one of his many aliases to come out and talk about what China's doing. He has to look at what he's doing in his own backyard.
Yeah, it's very difficult to say China without doing it in a Donald Trump accent, isn't it, James?
China.
So there you go. China. I told you. I knew you
China.
could. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I'm going to start off. I'm being told off, I think, by somebody in the live chat who's saying that the immigration figures are 685. Well, listen, Danny, I did say nearly 700,000. So whatever. Right. Okay. I have to agree with Rick on everything he said. I think it's a bit hypocritical, the UK accusing China of supplying weapons to Russia. So I won't repeat all of that. I guess, you've got to zoom out and look at the backdrop to this. Russia, I've got no time for Putin and his regime, and they're just as bad as the US regime and these scumbags in Westminster. So I've got no time for him. But, you can see that Russia has been backed into this. If, for example, Russia made friends with Canada and started putting his weapons there and putting its troops in there, trainers and whatever else, the US would go to war with Canada. So this whole thing is a big bag of hypocrisy, as far as I'm concerned, by the UK government. And by the way, I've got Andrew Bridgen on my show in half an hour. He's going to be talking about this because he says the UK is already at war with Russia. It's just that the UK public haven't been told about it yet.
No, well, do send Andrew my very best. We've shared a studio many times, which is good. But let me just play devil's advocate here, because the difference is that Russia invaded Ukraine, didn't they? And that's the sort of principle. So should countries be supporting this? What do you think, Rick?
Well, you've got to ask yourself, why did they invade? What was happening in the 7 or 8 years prior to that? Here's the big problem, Andrew, that's faced by most people and why people are so susceptible to mainstream media manipulation. Back in February of 2022, let's go back to January of 2022. If you ask most people to point to Ukraine on a map, they couldn't do it. If you asked them to describe the Ukrainian flag, they couldn't do it. If you asked them who the president of Ukraine was,
who's the president of Australia? They've taken it over.
No, this has nothing to do with Australia, but you get the point then. All of a sudden, this conflict was thrust upon us on the basis that Putin has gone in hard to the eastern parts into the Donbass region. He wants to take over. over. But they don't realize what happened prior to that. For 8 years prior to that, there was a color revolution there. The government was overthrown by the Americans, and they instilled their own government, and they were committing atrocities in the eastern part of Ukraine. So you've got to put all this into context here. If it was just a case of Russia piling in for they wanted a land grab, then you would understand why there would be a lot of ire against this, but a lot of people don't know the backstory behind it, and therein lies the problem: susceptibility to propaganda.
Well, and that's what we like to do here on the Muckrakers. I think the basic principle, we always like to shine more light and less heat. And so many people forget what we have to do is look at the facts. Because if you put things in context and try to understand the real issues, then that'll help towards a solution. So what do you think the solution might be then, James?
To what the
Russia conflict, to the invasion of Ukraine? How do we stop those two fighting?
Well, I think first of all, NATO need to make clear that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. I think NATO need to back off and allow Russia to have this buffer zone between NATO and Russia. I think that needs to happen first. But look, let's be clear. I agree with Rick. Zelensky is a Western puppet. He was installed there. I mean, for God's sakes, he was a comedian. He was in a sitcom about a teacher becoming president of the country. This was a US operation to put him in place. He's been exposed as having loads of offshore accounts, millions and millions and millions. He's as corrupt as they come. And also we know there are battalions within the Ukrainian army that essentially are Nazis, proper Nazis. And if you Google it, you'll see that our mainstream press, The Guardian and all of those were talking about it back in 2017-18. It's just very conveniently gone away now that the narrative has changed.
But it's interesting. I mean, you talk about Zelensky being a comedian. The reality is, it goes back to my central point about communication. What's happening in the world is they're electing personalities, people who can communicate. And that's why Ronald Reagan, he may not have been the best politician or the brightest mind, but people adored him because he could communicate. Donald Trump is a wonderful character at populating the media. And Boris did the same on that sort of basis. That's what you need. You have personalities, and people put personalities before politics, don't they?
I'm going to correct you there, Andrew. The reason Zelensky and others have been put in there is because they're controllable. They're owned by those in the West, or they're the globalists, whoever you want to say. They, I don't know who they are. But essentially, these politicians are owned. That's why they're put in there.
And also, very interesting point. The calls are flooding in. Before I come back to you, Rick, the calls are flooding in. I've got Janie phoning in from Scotland. Janie, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. I've just tuned in this last few seconds. I'm getting the gist of it all, but I'll give him a tuppence worth what I feel, if that's all right.
Yep, absolutely. A tuppence worth is about everything's worth at the moment. Go for it.
Well, yeah. Well, I believe that all the politicians and anybody involved with politics and all these people that are supposed to be globalists or people that run the world, they cannot ever be trusted. How can people possibly feel that they can trust a bunch of twats who encouraged everybody on the planet to take a COVID pandemic vaccine that has now been on their news, on their fake news media, but sometimes they have to let the truth come out, that has been causing strokes and aneurysms, and everybody's been dying because of their AstraZeneca jabs. Now, not only that, but as we mentioned, as I said there, they've got lots of money, they're cheats, they're liars. Now, if the government, and that's what they are, if the government can lie about our history, if they can lie about, say, for example, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Tartarian buildings, the mudfloods. They know that these things existed. They also know that giants existed, but we won't go there. That's all the things that these globalists know, and they keep it from us. How can anybody believe that they think that when you vote for a politician, because they're all tarred with the one brush, how can anybody believe that their vote counts? What a lot of bollocks. And the sooner people waken up to the truth, then that's when they can start fighting this tyranny that's upon us globally right now. And now that's where everything should just end, because that's how it is.
No,
Well
Janie,
said.
that's incredible. You're up in Scotland. Let me ask you, because obviously it's an interesting timing. We're talking about the SNP, and they're in disarray at the moment. What are the views from Scotland? Who will you be voting for?
I would never ever vote. I know that the television, your television, fake news media tell you to vote, and they've all got their assumptions what they're going to do for the world. They're all a part of the same niche. They're all a part of the same. Go and shut that door for me, John. They're all tarred with the same brush. Why would
Come on,
I
John.
vote? Why would I vote for a bunch of idiots who lie, who are only there to line their pockets, and they're only there to make us feel that our vote counts, and it doesn't. Because imagine, what do you think would happen if everybody in the world just didn't vote? Let's stop voting. Do you think the world would stop? Do you think that their agenda for new world order and this one would just stop because there would be enough limit? No, they would just be like, oh, this is great. However, they would worry about people starting to waken up, and of course, but they would just carry on as normal, and they would decide who votes exactly as they do right now. Your vote does not count.
So voting is the adult version of writing a letter to
lie.
Santa. That's what they're saying. The adult version of writing a letter to Santa. Janie, this is what free speech is all about. Thank you very much for calling. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be right back after these messages. This is Andrew Eborn with the Muckrakers.
Critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
You're listening to the home of free speech. If only somebody'd use that as a catchphrase. This is Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and my glorious guests, Rick Munn and James Freeman. But we also want to hear from you wonderful callers today. I love it. We've had Frank yet again, and also the wonderful Janie all the way from Scotland. I want to hear from you. Here are those numbers.
This is the way we're going to be heard.
From the U.S. and Canada, call 1-888-201-6425. From the U.K., call 033-0024-1026. And from Australia and New Zealand, call 1-800-670-310. Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
So it's interesting we talk about free speech being alive and well. Well, half the world's population cannot speak freely their mind, according to a new report on freedom of expression. It's in its annual report, the advocate group Article 19 found the number of people facing a crisis in freedom of speech and information was the highest this century, after a sharp rise from 34% in 2022 to 53% in 2023. So, gentlemen, is freedom of speech getting worse, in your opinion? What do you think, James?
It's not a big surprise, is it, this? I mean, look, they censored the president of the United States. We know that Twitter, there were FBI teams working within Twitter. That's all come out now since Elon Musk took it out. I assume the same is going on with Facebook. I think they're working with the CIA to censor people around the world. Obviously, we've seen with the COVID era and the jabs and whatnot, we've seen many prominent professors, world-leading doctors, professors, academics, politicians being censored online. We've got the Digital Services Act in the EU. We've got the Online Safety Bill in the UK, and we've got that lovely e-safety office in Australia. Look, it's no big surprise. It's going on. Even X now, even though it is the best free speech platform, even that is still being censored heavily at the moment behind the scenes. So look, I don't think this is any big surprise, really. Do you, Andrew?
Well, you say it's been censored behind the scenes because they've changed the policy, Elon Musk, hasn't he? What he's done is turn around and say, well, actually, their community notes is what you can do now. Rather than being taken off air, people can add context, they can add comments, they can root out fake news and stuff like that. What makes you say that they're censoring people?
Because their CEO has said so. Because basically the algorithms, look, for something to go viral, it's how the algorithms work. So they have the controls about whether to push something or whether not to push something. That is censorship. And she's been quite clear that if people are speaking about things, they will allow them to say it on the platform, but they will make sure that it does not get publicized. So that came from X itself. So I think it's quite clear.
Well,
listen,
just to be clear on
the
that,
other
what
thing
he
is,
actually said.
if you
Let
say
me just deal with that point. I know there's a slight delay. What he actually said is that basically, if there is an issue with something that's said, and the issue might be it's not true, and there's versions of the truth, that will then basically be turned down the volume as to how you find it. So that's the algorithm. But how would you then deal with that, Rick? What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. Speaking as somebody that's used that platform and grew a reasonably sized listener base or, follower base off the back of that, I can say without a shadow of a doubt, and James referenced the CEO, Linda Yaccarino, that came in there. One of the very first things she said right from the get-go was she said, freedom of speech does not necessarily equate to freedom of reach. So if there's anything that's deemed to be unsavory, you're free to say it. But she admitted herself that you would be crushed in terms of your reach. And speaking from personal experience, I had way more engagement and way more reach when I had a quarter of the followers that I do now. And I didn't pay for the blue tick, which I was told meant that I would be strangled even more. But then I got one for free recently, and it's made absolutely no difference at all to me. So there's certainly flags put up on certain accounts, and spam bots are dispatched to crush the algorithm. There's a porn spam bot on there, or a crypto spam bot. It crushes your expression reach. I think as well, guys, one thing to note was we're talking about online here as well. Thankfully, old school style, we can still go out and congregate amongst each other in the flesh, organize rallies, organize get-togethers. We can still speak more freely in the real world than we can online, but also bearing in mind that most of the online communication now that's how people get their news. That's how people get their points across. Without a doubt, there's a big stranglehold being put in that as we speak.
And do you think it's got worse or better since Elon spent his 44 billion? I mean, we should also point out that I was very easy to find James's Twitter handle, and mine is at Andrew Eborn, very easy to find. Rick, you're a bit more difficult to find. Tell me first, what happened? Is there a reason behind that?
Well, yeah, my handle's no risk, no reward, because that's my philosophy in life. If you don't take risks, you don't get any benefits, and you got to be prepared to lose some stuff along the way. So that's where that handle came from. And when I started it off, I had no idea that it would develop into something that, a lot of people would listen to actually what I had to say, let alone land me a broadcasting gig. So it was a throwaway title from the start. I didn't realize that it would go as far as it did. So
that's how you got the gig on TNT, Today's News Talk.
Is that right? Through making Twitter videos. Mike Rand saw one. He invited me on the TV program called Asia Pacific Today. He liked the interview, and then he offered me a job in this startup fledgling talk radio station called TNT. I was actually the first person to be recruited, I believe. So there you go.
What a joy.
There's hope for us all. There's
certainly hope for us, and I love having these voices. James, I presume so many people had your sort of handle, didn't they, with James Freeman? There's lots of those around.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been an MEP, so I had quite a big following before I came to TNT. I'm going to address your question that you asked earlier. Is it got better or worse under Elon Musk? It's definitely got better. Without a doubt, it's got better. I mean, look, if you look back to the US elections back in 2020, it was rife then. So we had obviously the Hunter Biden's laptop story. And there was a big cover up with that. The Washington Post published that story. And then we had a letter from 50 intelligence chiefs in the US saying it was all Russian propaganda. And of course, Twitter, and we know that because Elon Musk has revealed this. That was basically anybody talking about Hunter Biden's laptop in that week to the US elections was just basically cancelled or their tweets deleted or whatever. So it's definitely improved. And we also know, like I said, about the FBI teams. They had their own comms systems within Twitter. That's all in the public domain now. So definitely got better. It's the best of the bunch, definitely. But I just want to be clear. It still is. People are still being censored on certain topics there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk about Israel and you're critical of Israel, that post ain't going anywhere.
That's an interesting one. Why do you think that? Let's first of all challenge that point. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's because the reach of Israel. They're extremely powerful. I mean, look, Benjamin Netanyahu stood up in front of the cameras and told Joe Biden that he needed to do something about these ICC officials who are potentially going to put out arrest warrants for him. Less than a week later, we've got a public letter from 7 senators, Republican senators in the US, threatening those ICC officials and their family members. I think that speaks volumes in terms of how Israel has got reach and power and influence in the US and in the British government as well. It's the same here. So that is why.
And do you think, I'm talking about the ICC, do you think they were right to talk about this arrest warrant for Netanyahu?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just look. You just need to look at the evidence and things that are going on. There's a lot of covering up. There's a lot of propaganda, babies and ovens, all of that nonsense. Just go and watch Double Down News. They've done a brilliant documentary. Yes, there was a lot of violence, and both sides are to blame for that. But the propaganda and that machine around that is just, it's just so pervasive. There's a lot of mistruths and disinformation being pumped out, far more than is coming from the public. Most of it is coming from the mainstream media and Israel and our governments.
Yeah, and what I found particularly shocking, there's an organization called the Alumni for Free Speech, and they worked out that 220 times as much money is spent on EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, as it is on free speech. And that's got to be wrong, hasn't it, Rick?
Yeah, it does. And again, the old saying goes, Andrew, you got to follow the money. It all comes back to who's backing these organizations up. And I also want to, make it clear as well. I agree with James, just backtracking a tad on the X or the Twitter platform. When you think about it, during 2020, 2021, you couldn't even type in the word vaccine without getting your account suspended. You couldn't type in ivermectin. You couldn't talk about any alternative treatment. You couldn't criticize the NHS or you would be banned. So that most definitely has been removed. And without a doubt, the topics that you can discuss are much, much wider now than they were before Musk took over the platform. But again, bearing back to what we said about freedom of speech does not equate to freedom of reach. I think James could testify that his account has been strangled on more than one occasion in certain areas, and so was mine. So we can say what we want without being banned, but will we get it to the audience that we need to get it to?
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing, go for it, James.
Andrew,
it's a little delay.
Yeah. There's also evidence as well that the British government, not just the US government, were collaborating with Twitter to censor people. I put in a subject access request for myself with DCMS, and I got reports back. They were compiling reports on me. And some of the examples they used, I was just literally sharing Daily Mail headlines and the story, which basically was talking about vaccine injuries. I didn't interpret it or put anything else. And DCMS were compiling these reports on me. I'm not the only one. Molly Kingsley, Julia Hartley-Brewer, Tony Hinton, there's lots of them. And basically these reports, the conclusions were, need to contact Twitter to tell them that this person has broken their rules. So the British government were collaborating with Twitter. I've got the evidence of that.
Well, Julia Hartley-Brewer is, I'm an absolute fan of her and spent many a good time in her studio. And indeed, celebrating James Whale getting his MBE fairly recently. Congratulations to him. So you're right. And what I want to emphasize, when reading the chat afterwards, I don't have it live here, but I know you guys do. A lot of people say, well, we don't have a platform to say anything. Well, you do. You should be phoning into the show. We're not going to silence you. We want to hear as many different views as possible to make that make sense. But tell me, in the final thought then, how do we make sure we're protecting free speech, fundamental right? How do you make sure we protect it? What do you reckon, Rick?
Well, the acid test is if you can say anything you like and have it broadcast or have it, as long as it's not inciting murdering people or inciting violence, of course, and, there's an argument to be made, you shouldn't be allowed to use a platform to spread that. But it's a very simple acid test. You should be able to say whatever you want to whoever you like. And, the old saying is offense is not something that you can give someone. Offense is only something that someone can take. So if you find me offensive today, for example, that's your problem per se. It's not my problem. And as I suggested to some people earlier on, who are not happy maybe with some aspects of TNT. If you don't like it, we're not going to necessarily change this to fit the masses. Go elsewhere where you are enjoying content and you are free to say what you want to do and take that elsewhere. I think the same applies with freedom of speech. The acid test is, can you say what you want without inciting violence and hatred towards certain groups, of course, which we wouldn't advocate, and get away with it? And the answer to that is very apparent as soon as you start speaking up, as James has said, against certain countries or certain regimes or certain people that are in positions in power in the world at the minute.
No, it is interesting, and we always say that the truth is the truth, no matter how many people or how few people believe it, and a lie is a lie, no matter how many people believe that lie. And it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, a lie goes halfway around the world before the truth has even got its boots on. Tell me, James, what do you reckon then? How do we protect free speech in this polluted world?
Well, look. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. I think there are some pretty grim and pretty socially unacceptable views out there that we hear about and things. I don't think we should be hiding them. I think we should be giving them air. I think we should be shining a light on it so that the rest of us can say, no, absolutely, we do not agree with that. And you are wrong. That is how you deal with free speech. You don't start. Because look, as soon as you start trying to arbiter who and what, who can speak and what can be said, well, then you're putting that power in another person. And we all know what happens then. You centralize power, and the people you don't want to be able to control that power, they're the ones that are attracted to those controls. And we end up in the situation where we are now, because power is power. Power begets power. So get rid of it all. Let's air those unsavory views and let's shine a light on it.
No, you're absolutely right. It is indeed. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. We want to hear your views. You're not being silenced. Do get in touch with us on today's News Talk. Gentlemen, it's been fascinating conversation. It's flown by. We've had some great guests as well. Great people phoning in on that sort of basis. If you do want to get in touch with the show, do let us know. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Andrew Eborn. Tell us yours, James.
James Freeman. I think it's James_Freeman__.
And Rick?
Just look up No Risk, No Reward, and you'll find yourself on my page for your sins.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll be back with you, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, this has been the Muckrakers. Be safe.